Space Delta 18 National Space Intelligence Center is the Space Force's service intelligence center, much like all other services have a service intelligence center. In fact, we're the only service intelligence center whose sole focus is space.
Something happened after Space Force Delta 18 made a discovery connected to Giza, and the unit went completely dark. No statement, no briefing, no explanation of any kind. Before the silence, they had done one strange, specific thing. They placed the Sphinx of Giza on their official military emblem. This is the unit that watches the most critical band of orbit above this planet, the ring that GPS, missile warning, and nuclear command all run through.
Space Delta 4, in a nutshell, is responsible for missile warning and missile tracking across the entire enterprise. We are the all-seeing eye, looking for missile threats that impact the entire globe, not just North America.
They had 1,000 symbols to choose from. They chose that one. And then a researcher mapped the geometry cut into the Great Pyramid, an angle drilled through solid stone 5,000 years ago, directly onto the orbital path this unit patrols today. The geometry matched. The unit said nothing. And no one, not one journalist, not one senator, has ever made them explain why. The Sphinx on the seal. What you are about to see is sitting in plain sight on a government fact sheet that almost nobody has read. September 2025, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. America's most classified space intelligence unit quietly opens a new operations floor. No cameras, no press conference, no public statement of any kind. The unit is called the National Space Intelligence Center.
Space Force commanding officer reiterated his intent to have the National Space Intelligence Center co-located with NASIC at Wright-Pat,
formerly Space Delta 18. Their job is to track everything that moves in the geosynchronous belt, the ring of orbit sitting 22,300 miles above Earth's equator, where civilization's most critical infrastructure lives. GPS, military communications, missile warning, the systems this civilization depends on to function. And when they designed the official emblem for that mission, they chose one symbol. Not a satellite, not a launch vehicle, not a radar array scanning the sky. A sphinx. The same stone figure that has sat silent on the Giza Plateau for thousands of years, watching, saying nothing. The official explanation for that choice is 4 words: wisdom, knowledge, and challenges. That is the complete public record. No elaboration, no press conference, no follow-up documentation, no journalist has pressed them on it. No congressional testimony has touched it. Space Delta 18 was activated in June 2022, named for the Space Force becoming the 18th member of the U.S. intelligence community. Their mission is to track every threat in the geosynchronous belt. To do that, they operate a classified program called GSSAP, the Geosynchronous Space Situational Awareness Program. These are not passive satellites. They physically maneuver close to other spacecraft, sliding up alongside them in orbit to photograph, analyze, and identify them. 6 GSSAP satellites are active right now.
It's been described as the space-based version of Neighborhood Watch. The US has sent 2 military satellites into orbit to get a greater insight into other countries' activities there.
2 more launch in early 2026. It's been described as the space-based version of Neighborhood Watch. The US has sent 2 military satellites into orbit to get greater insight into other countries' activities there. And, as of mid-2025, the National Space Intelligence Center has quietly expanded from 2 intelligence squadrons to 4. They doubled their analytical capacity in 3 years. The official reason: increasing demand. Increasing demand for what exactly is not specified. At first glance, the Sphinx looks like a design choice, a graphic designer reaching for something classical. But then the United States Space Force fact sheet surfaced, and the language stopped cold. The document does not say the Sphinx represents strength, protection, or vigilance. Those are the standard vocabulary of military unit emblems. This document says something different. Reading verbatim, the Sphinx gazes upward, drawing the viewer's eye from the past into the future and the blackness of space. Upward into the blackness of space, in the official document for a unit that watches a specific ring of orbit 22,300 miles above the ground. But that is not the word that matters most. According to the document, the Sphinx sits omnipresent over the world. Omnipresent. That is a theological word. It belongs in Scripture, not a military fact sheet. You do not reach for that word by accident. You reach for it when you want to describe something that is everywhere at once, that sees everything, that cannot be hidden from, that has no gaps in its awareness and no limits on its sight. Whoever wrote that word into an official United States Space Force document knew exactly what they were saying. It is not metaphor, it is precision. The unit watching geosynchronous orbit is omnipresent over the world in exactly the same way those satellites are.
Is a uniform structure. There's several pillars, and all of this is like very, very, very weird.
Yeah, 600 meters descending down those cylinders, and then there's more stuff below it, and then there's additional structures inside of it. Yeah, that was crazy.
A permanent, unsleeping eye that nothing on the surface below can escape. And nobody has been asked to explain it. Not once. The unit went dark on the question of why they chose this symbol, what they know about this plateau, and what the geometry underneath all of it means. It is a uniform structure. There are several pillars, and all of this is very, very, very weird. Yeah, 600 meters descending down those cylinders, and then there's more stuff below it, and then there's additional structures inside of it. Yeah, that was crazy. That silence does not feel accidental, and this is where things stop being symbolic. The geometry. In the 1990s, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink built a small robot specifically designed to explore the narrow internal shafts of the Great Pyramid. Not the main corridors, the shafts that dart outward from the burial chambers at precise angles, cutting through tens of meters of solid stone in ways that should have been structurally catastrophic to build. They are too narrow for a person. They serve no obvious architectural function, and they were built with a precision that still generates serious debate among engineers today. Gantenbrink sent his robot into the southern shaft from the king's chamber and measured the angle. The result was 45.0 degrees. Not approximately, not roughly. Precisely 45.0 degrees through tens of meters of solid stone, held to a fraction of a degree of perfection across the entire length of the passage. Let that land for a second. Someone carved that tunnel by hand through the heart of the largest stone structure in human history and hit a perfect geometric constant. That is not an accident of construction. That is intent encoded in stone. According to astronomical analysis by researchers including Virginia Trimble and Alexander Badawi, the shaft aligns to the transit point of Al-Nitak, the brightest star in Orion's belt, as it crossed the Giza meridian around 2480 BCE. They pointed it at a specific cluster of stars in a specific position in the sky, at a specific moment in time. Now, here is the part that nobody talks about. Orion's belt sits at approximately 0 degrees declination. That is the celestial equator, the band of sky that runs directly above Earth's actual equator. The geosynchronous belt orbits at exactly 0 degrees inclination above Earth's actual equator. The same plane, the same geometry, one encoded in stone 5,000 years ago.
Understandings of mathematics that they interlined into these structures, which clearly say they possessed some advanced knowledge of the constellations.
One currently patrolled by classified US military satellites, and the unit that patrols that second belt chose the guardian of the plateau, encoding the first as their symbol. That is not a coincidence anyone should walk away from. If you want to keep following this thread, subscribe, because what comes next is stranger than the geometry. The Giza Plateau sits at 30 degrees north latitude. At 30 degrees north, the geosynchronous belt appears as a precise, thin arc at roughly 6 degrees above the southern horizon. Not scattered across the sky, not directly overhead, a defined stripe, always in the same place, every clear night. The ancient Egyptians saw that band running edge to edge across their southern horizon for thousands of years. Understandings of mathematics that they interlined into these structures, which clearly say they possess some advanced knowledge of the constellations. The king's chamber shaft, at 45.0 degrees, points toward the stars that move along that same band, and the Sphinx faces due east toward where Orion rises. The constellation that the pyramid texts and the Book of the Dead link directly to Osiris, to the gods who came from the sky, to the origins of civilization itself. To be precise, the claim here is not that the ancient Egyptians built the pyramid to watch spacecraft. What is harder to dismiss than that is this. The angle a civilization cut into a pyramid to track a specific band of stars is the same geometry that optimally positions you to observe the specific band of orbit space delta 18 monitors today. One civilization looked up at that band and encoded it in stone. Another civilization looks down from that band and put the stone's guardian on their seal. And Space Delta 18, the unit that went dark on this question, chose the guardian of that plateau as their symbol, used the word omnipresent in their official documentation, and has never been asked to connect any of it. Not by one journalist, not in one hearing, not in one public statement.
We have to understand that there is a Space Force, and the purpose of the Space Force is to guarantee space superiority for the joint force. Not space for space sake, space to guarantee that just like all the other domains, we can fight as a joint force.
That is a specific, sustained, deliberate silence, and it has lasted since June 2022. That brings us to what they are actually watching in the geosynchronous belt right now, and this is where the silence becomes harder to defend. Dogfighting in space. Let's talk about what the National Space Intelligence Center is watching, because this is not a slow-moving situation, and the orbital combat activity in the same belt Giza's geometry points to has been escalating for years. China does not sit still in orbit. Their satellites in the geosynchronous belt have been maneuvering for years, sliding along the belt, approaching American spacecraft, studying them at close range, documenting their capabilities. U.S. Space Force officials initially described it publicly as a cat and mouse game. In March 2025, the language changed entirely. Here is where it becomes a scene, not a briefing. At a public defense conference in March 2025, U.S. Space Force Vice Chief General Michael Gwetlin stood in front of an audience. We have to understand that there is a Space Force, and the purpose of the Space Force is to guarantee space superiority for the joint force. Not space for space's sake. Space to guarantee that, just like all the other domains, we can fight as a joint force of defense professionals. And he said something that had never been said at that level, in that setting, on the record. 5 Chinese satellites had been observed maneuvering in and out and around each other in synchronicity, under deliberate control. He called it dogfighting in space, his exact framing. They are practicing tactics, techniques, and procedures for orbital combat from one satellite to another. The word he chose was not maneuvering, it was not activity, it was dogfighting. That word choice was deliberate. A senior Space Force officer used the language of aerial combat to describe what is happening 22,300 miles above, in the belt that Giza's shafts point toward. 5 objects moving together in a belt that GPS, military communications, and missile warning systems all depend on. 5 objects rehearsing for something. Here is the part nobody is reporting. The data confirming that Chinese orbital combat training came not from a classified government sensor, not from GSSAP, not from Silent Barker, not from the 4 classified squadrons, but from a private company called Exoanalytic Solutions, a commercial satellite tracking firm with ground-based telescopes. The unit with 4 classified squadrons and 6 dedicated surveillance spacecraft, and the public confirmation of what those squadrons are watching came from a company that any government or corporation can contract with. That is a managed release. What gets confirmed publicly and through whom is a decision someone is making deliberately. In January 2022, 3 months before Space Delta 18 even activated, a Chinese satellite called Shijian-21 maneuvered in geosynchronous orbit, approached a defunct navigation spacecraft from China's Beidou constellation, physically latched onto it, and dragged it 3,000 kilometers away into graveyard orbit. They moved a satellite, grabbed it, and relocated it. The U.S. Space Force watched it happen. Commercial trackers documented it. The US response was 3 sentences. Compare that to November 2021, when Russia destroyed one of its own satellites in an anti-satellite test. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson went on television multiple times. The State Department issued formal condemnation. Emergency UN briefings followed. International outrage ran for days. Russia blew up a satellite. Russia's dangerous and irresponsible behavior jeopardizes the long-term sustainability of outer space and clearly demonstrates that Russia's claims of opposing the weaponization of space are disingenuous and hypocritical. The world responded. China grabbed one, moved it 3,000 kilometers, and dropped it in a graveyard orbit. 3 sentences. The capability to physically relocate a satellite in the belt that missile warning and nuclear command run through. And the official response is 3 sentences. The asymmetry of that silence tells you more than any of the statements do. Space Delta 18 went dark on Shijian 21 in the same way it went dark on the Sphinx. The information exists, the explanation doesn't. And that was before China removed the last remaining physical constraint on everything it can do in the belt, the refueling station. In January 2025, China launched the first on-orbit refueling station in geosynchronous orbit, the first of its kind in the history of spaceflight. Let that land, a satellite that can refuel other satellites indefinitely, changing everything about what is possible in the belt. Before this, every satellite in geosynchronous orbit was operating on a countdown, a fixed amount of propellant, a finite number of maneuvers, a predictable lifespan. Planners on all sides could estimate when a satellite would run dry, when it would stop maneuvering, when it would become fixed and predictable. That entire strategic calculation is now gone for any Chinese spacecraft that can reach the refueling station. A spacecraft that can refuel does not run out of options. It does not become predictable. It does not stop. The rules of orbital strategy changed in January 2025. The announcement was not on the front page of any major newspaper. And the unit watching the belt where all of this is happening, the unit with the Sphinx on its seal, the unit that used the word omnipresent, the unit that went dark on every question connecting Giza to its mission, that unit is watching. Silent Barker, the classified program running alongside GSSAP in the geosynchronous belt, is almost impossible to find in the public record. It is called Silent Barker, a constellation of classified satellites built in collaboration with the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, America's spy satellite agency, the organization that designs and operates the country's most sensitive intelligence satellites and almost never appears in public at all. General Stephen Whiting, commander of U.S. Space Command. Capabilities provide the PLA with the ability to command and control their forces far from their own shores and provide them enhanced situational awareness, enabling them to monitor, track, and potentially target U.S. and allied forces. He said in March 2024 that he had personally traveled to the NRO for a classified briefing on Silent Barker. He stood in front of reporters and cameras afterward, and this is what he said. Silent Barker is a very important program for us. 1 sentence. That is the complete unclassified record. Here is the part nobody is reporting. A classified surveillance constellation in the most contested orbital band on Earth, run by the Spy Satellite Agency, operated by a unit whose emblem invokes ancient Egypt and whose official language invokes scripture. And the sum total of what the public has been allowed to know about it is 1 sentence from a general who drove to the NRO and came back with a briefing he cannot share. The name itself tells you something. Silent Barker. Something that watches without announcing. Something that sees without being seen. That naming convention is not accidental either, and the silence around it carries the same texture as the silence around the Sphinx. A closed door with a word on it that technically means nothing and actually means everything. More time has gone into searching for a second sentence about Silent Barker than should be necessary. There isn't one. What comes next is what fills that void. Stealth and disappearance. The December 2025 defense bill added $1.2 billion to Space Force research and development, split between low Earth orbit data transport and space-based missile warning. The classified programs feeding the National Space Intelligence Center are not described in the bill. A new space intelligence production cell opened September 26, 2025, linking live intelligence directly to orbital operations in real time. That cell is operational right now. China is on pace for 100 orbital launches in 2025 alone. They have doubled their total on-orbit payload count compared to 2024. 2 separate mega-constellations are being built simultaneously, and this is where it stops being background and becomes alarming. Brigadier General Brian Sidari, the Space Force's Deputy Chief for Intelligence, said in September 2025, quoting him directly, "It is concerning how fast they have done it, not the capabilities, the speed." In December 2025, China's experimental Xi'an-24 satellites. China has launched a new pair of satellites into orbit to conduct technology tests aimed at improving space object detection capabilities. The same family that performed the dogfighting maneuvers General Gitlein described were observed by Space Force tracking systems with progressively smaller radar signatures. The first satellite in the series had a normal return. The second was measurably smaller. The third was smaller still. That is a deliberate engineering progression. China is reducing the radar cross-section of its orbital combat platforms, building stealth into objects that orbit 22,300 miles above the Earth, making them harder to find, harder to track, harder to target. And one of those satellites spent 5 weeks completely invisible after its September 2025 launch, gone from the public database of on-orbit objects for over a month. Not malfunctioning, not lost, demonstrating. It showed that it could disappear, that a satellite could enter the geosynchronous belt, vanish from every tracking system the rest of the world has access to, reappear when it chose, and that no public authority would explain how or why. That is not a malfunction. That is a message. And the unit watching that belt, the one that went dark on the Giza connection, the one with the omnipresent Sphinx on its seal, that unit has 4 classified squadrons watching a belt where satellites are now practicing combat and then going invisible. What happened next was the part that made the whole picture snap into focus: orbital warfare. In February 2026, the Space Force activated a prototype spacecraft under Mission Delta IX, described by Space Force commanders as the only dedicated orbital warfare unit in the US government. Their commander said they are practicing maneuvers to deliver offensive and defensive capabilities that are, his exact word, precise. Not broad, not deterrent, precise. You do not use that word for general deterrence. You use it when you have already identified specific targets in a specific location and are rehearsing what you intend to do to them. The X-37B, the Air Force's unmanned reusable space plane, landed at NASA's Kennedy Space Center shuttle landing facility on Sunday. The X-37B orbital test vehicle, Mission 4, or OTV-4, conducted on-orbit experiments for 718 days during its mission. The classified military space plane that has spent years at a time in orbit with almost no public disclosure of its activities, performed a maneuver in 2024 that had never been documented before. Aerobraking. Dipping into the upper edges of Earth's atmosphere to use drag to shift orbits rapidly without burning onboard propellant. It maneuvered to a different orbit without announcement. The Space Force confirmed it happened. They did not confirm what orbit it moved to. They did not confirm what it was doing before. They did not confirm what it was doing after. A first-of-its-kind maneuver from a classified spacecraft in the most contested domain above this planet, surrounded by the same quality of silence that surrounds the Sphinx, the refueling station, Shijian-21, and Silent Barker. Here is what you are looking at when you step back from each individual program and see them together. You have a unit with a classified emblem connection it will not explain. A surveillance constellation acknowledged in one sentence. An adversary that grabbed a satellite and moved it 3,000 kilometers, while the official response was 3 sentences. An on-orbit refueling capability that eliminated the last physical limit on what China can do in the belt. Stealth engineering that can make combat satellites disappear from public tracking for over a month. and an orbital warfare unit practicing precision maneuvers against targets it will not name. Each of these facts has a conventional explanation when examined alone. Together, they describe a domain that is already contested, already militarized in ways the public has not been told, and already being shaped by a unit whose emblem reaches back 5,000 years to the same geometric plane it patrols today. The pattern is consistent. The unit watches, the program expands, the silence holds. And the Sphinx on the seal, the guardian of the plateau, whose geometry encodes the plane of orbit they monitor, sits omnipresent over the world. What should be happening? What should be happening, given everything documented here, is regular, unclassified briefings on the state of the most critical orbital infrastructure this civilization depends on. Transparency about Chinese refueling stations and synchronized combat maneuvers in the belts that GPS, nuclear command, and missile warning all run through. Public accountability for a force operating in a domain every human being on Earth depends on. And at absolute minimum, a clear public explanation of why the military's primary space intelligence unit chose an ancient Egyptian monument whose geometry encodes the exact plane of orbit they monitor. Why the official document describing that choice used the word omnipresent. And what exactly they discovered about the Giza connection before they went silent on it. What is happening instead? 4 classified squadrons. Silent Barker acknowledged in one sentence from a general who came back from a briefing he cannot discuss. Stealth satellites engineered to vanish from public tracking databases. 5 objects practicing orbital combat in the belt, GPS, runs through. A refueling station that permanently removes fuel constraints from every Chinese spacecraft that can reach it. An orbital warfare unit rehearsing precision maneuvers against targets it will not name. A classified spaceplane executing an unprecedented orbital shift with no explanation of what it moved toward, and the word omnipresent on the seal of the unit watching all of it, a unit that went dark after this Giza discovery and has not explained why. The Space Force publishes detailed explanations of every emblem element for every unit in every mission area. In the middle is a symbol that the space community has used for years and years and years. The North Star signifies our core value, our guiding light, if you will. And the orbit around the globe signifies the space capabilities that fuel our American way of life and our American way of war. It names its programs publicly: ghosts, sharks, Norse mythology, and walks the public through the symbolism. On this, on the Sphinx, on the orbital geometry, on the Giza connection, nothing. Not a comment, not a footnote, not a clarification beyond the 4 words in the June 2022 fact sheet. They went dark, and the darkness has now lasted years. What nobody can tell you. Weeks have gone into reviewing fact sheets, congressional testimony, declassified contracts, orbital tracking data, ancient astronomical surveys, architectural analyses of the Great Pyramid's internal shafts, and every public statement any Space Force commander has made about the geosynchronous belt. It is possible to say what Space Delta 18 watches, what China practiced in that belt in 2024 and 2025, that Rudolf Gantenbrink's robot measured exactly 45.0 degrees in the King's Chamber shaft. That is verifiable. The Space Force's own words are on record. Their Sphinx gazes upward into the blackness of space. Every classified program name that has slipped into public record through congressional hearings and budget documents is documented here. The geosynchronous belt and the celestial equator that Giza's shafts point toward occupy the same geometric plane. And that is not a coincidence of measurement, but a consequence of how Earth's geometry and orbital mechanics work together. What remains unknown is the one thing that makes all of it matter. Whether the people who designed that emblem knew exactly what they were doing when they placed Giza's guardian on the seal of the unit that watches the belt Giza's geometry points to. Maybe it was a designer who studied ancient history and reached for something visually powerful. Maybe it was a commander who had read the pyramid shaft research and understood the geometric connection in full. Maybe it is a coincidence so precise that it simply never occurred to anyone that an explanation was needed. Maybe the word omnipresent was chosen by a staff officer who felt it was right and never thought through what it revealed about who was doing the watching and from where. Or maybe when you were tasked with watching the most contested and most vital band of space above this planet, the same band a civilization 5,000 years ago encoded in stone and watched from the desert floor, you choose the symbol that has always been there. The one that was watching that band of sky before there were satellites in it, before there were nations, before there was anyone to classify anything, and then you go silent because some things are better left where they have always been. The Sphinx watches, the satellites watch, and somewhere in a classified operations center that opened without cameras, people are watching all of it and not saying why. If you think you know the answer, or if this thread is pulling you somewhere you weren't expecting, drop your thoughts in the comments. The Sphinx has been keeping it silent for thousands of years. You don't have to. And if you want to keep following the things that official documents say without saying, subscribe. We are just getting started. And where this goes next is not somewhere the fact sheets will take you.